She looked me in the eyes and said, "You're a failure." That moment didn't just hurt, it defined me. For years, I carried her voice in my head, every doubt, every rejection, every sleepless night building something no one believed in. I had nothing. No support. No safety net. Just silence and fire. Then one day, she stood outside a glass building, staring up. My name was on it. She said nothing. She couldn't. Comment rise if you've ever been doubted. The words didn't just land, they echoed. Ava stood frozen, her hands clenched, her chest tight as if the air had been pulled out of the room. Her mother didn't yell. That made it worse. The calm tone, the certainty, the finality, it cut deeper than any scream ever could. And for a second, Ava almost spoke. Almost defended herself. Almost said, "I'm trying." But the words never came. Because deep down, a small part of her believed it. That was the first crack. And then it spread. Every past failure rushed back. Every test she didn't ace. Every moment she wasn't enough. Every comparison she lost. It stacked layer by layer until the weight felt unbearable. Her mother turned away like the conversation was over, like Ava was already decided. That was the second blow. Not anger. Not disappointment. Just dismissal. Ava swallowed hard, forcing the tears back, but her vision blurred anyway. She nodded. Quiet. Controlled. Broken, but hiding it. And right there, something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a silent, dangerous thought forming beneath the pain. What if she's wrong? It flickered, then faded. Because the louder voice still whispered, "She's right." Ava turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, carrying a sentence she never agreed to, but didn't know how to escape. But that moment, that quiet walk away, wasn't the end of Ava's story. It only felt like one. Because years later, that same silence would return, but in a very different place. The air would feel just as heavy, the tension just as sharp, except this time, Ava wouldn't be the one shrinking. She would be the reason everything stopped. And her mother? She would be the one frozen. Standing still. Looking up. Confused. Disoriented. Almost small. But how did it get there? How did a girl who couldn't even defend herself become someone the world couldn't ignore? That's where the story twists. Not in one big moment, but in 1,000 small ones no one saw. Nights no one witnessed. Choices no one supported. Pain no one validated. And yet, something kept growing. Quietly. Relentlessly. Until one day, it wasn't invisible anymore. Because the next time Ava stood in front of her mother, nothing needed to be said. No arguments. No explanations. Just one undeniable truth, rising above them both. And when her mother finally saw it, really saw it, everything she once believed began to crack. And to understand how everything began to crack, you have to go back to where the pressure was first built. Ava didn't grow up in chaos. That was the strange part. Her home was quiet, organized, almost perfect from the outside. But inside that silence lived something heavier: expectation. Her mother, Linda, wasn't cruel in obvious ways. She didn't shout often. She didn't need to. Her disappointment was quieter, sharper, more precise. Every word she chose carried weight. Every look said more than a lecture ever could. At first, it seemed like love. Structured. Disciplined. Focused on success. Linda believed she was preparing Ava for the real world. No weakness. No excuses. No second chances. And Ava tried to keep up. She really did. She followed the rules, chased the grades, did everything she thought would finally earn approval. But it never came. That was the first tension. No matter how much she achieved, there was always something missing. Always something better she could have done. A higher score. A smarter decision. a different path. And slowly, that gap began to grow. Not between effort and result, but between who Ava was and who she was expected to be. The twist? Linda didn't see it as harm. She saw it as necessary. In her mind, pressure created strength. Criticism created success. And softness? That was failure. So she pushed harder. And harder. Each comment, each comparison, each silent judgment stacking into something Ava couldn't name yet, but felt deeply. Because beneath all of it, one message repeated over and over again, without ever being said directly: you are not enough. And that unspoken message didn't stay hidden for long. It started to take shape in words. At first, they sounded casual. Harmless, even. "Why can't you be more like Emily?" her mother would say, almost lightly. But the comparison lingered. It always did. Emily had better grades, better discipline, better focus. And suddenly, Ava wasn't just herself anymore. She was being measured against someone else. That was the first shift. Then it repeated. Again. And again. Different names, same pattern. Someone smarter. Someone more talented. Someone more promising. Each time, Ava smiled. Nodded. Pretended it didn't sting. But it did. Quietly. Deeply. Because no matter what she achieved, it was never the focus. The spotlight was always somewhere else. That was the tension building. The constant reminder that she was always second. Always lacking. And slowly, something inside her began to change. She tried harder. Studied longer. Pushed herself further, chasing a version of perfection that kept moving just out of reach. For a moment, it almost felt like progress. Like maybe this time would be enough. But then came the twist. Even when she improved, even when she succeeded, the comparisons didn't stop. They just evolved. That's good, but look at what they're doing. The finish line disappeared. Again. And again. And with every reset, Ava felt herself shrinking. Not in effort, but in belief. Because the real damage wasn't the comparison itself. It was what it slowly convinced her of, that no matter how far she went, she would always be behind. And after being compared for so long, Ava stopped asking if she was enough. She started asking something else. Was she even allowed to be herself? Because there was one thing she never shared anymore. One thing she quietly protected. Drawing. Late at night, when the house was silent, she would sketch lines, shapes, ideas that felt alive in a way nothing else did. It was the only time she felt, right? That was her escape. Her truth. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. One evening, her mother walked in. Saw the drawings. Paused. For a second, Ava thought, this is it. Maybe this time, she would understand. Maybe she would see something worth believing in. But instead, her mother's face hardened. This, she said, holding the paper up. This won't take you anywhere. The words hit instantly. Sharp. Final. Ava froze. Tried to explain. Tried to say she loved it. Needed it. But her mother cut her off. This is a waste of time. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But absolute. Something inside Ava cracked, and this time, it didn't heal. She didn't argue. Didn't cry. She just nodded, and slowly put the drawings away. One by one. Not because she stopped loving it, but because she believed she had to. That was the twist. The dream didn't die in anger. It died in silence. And from that silence, a new belief formed, dangerous, heavy, undeniable. What I love doesn't matter. And once that belief takes root, everything else begins to follow. Comment, stay true if you've ever been told to give up what you love. And once that belief settled in, Ava didn't fight it anymore. She adapted. Quietly. Completely. Because if what she loved didn't matter, then maybe what others wanted did. So when it came time to choose a major, she didn't hesitate. Not because she was sure, but because she had already given up choosing for herself. Business. Safe. Practical. Approved. Her mother nodded. That was enough. Or at least, it was supposed to be. At first, Ava told herself it made sense. This was the right path. The smart path. The one that would finally earn validation. That was the build. A new start. A clean direction. But the tension crept in fast. Lecture halls felt cold. Numbers felt empty. Every assignment felt like something she was completing, not something she believed in. She stayed up late, but not with passion, only pressure. And every time she looked at her notes, a quiet thought slipped through. This isn't me. She ignored it. Again. And again. Until one moment hit harder than the rest. Sitting in class, surrounded by students who seemed certain, Ava realized something terrifying. She didn't belong there. Not emotionally. Not mentally. Not at all. That was the crack. The shock wasn't failure, it was awareness. Because she was doing everything right and still felt completely wrong. The twist? No one noticed. Her grades were fine. Her path looked stable. From the outside, she was succeeding. But inside, something was slipping further away. Not her future, but herself. And the more she tried to fit in, the more she disappeared. And as Ava slowly disappeared inside that perfect path, the pressure didn't ease, it multiplied. At first, it looked like discipline. She followed schedules, met deadlines, stayed ahead of assignments. From the outside, everything was under control. That was the illusion. But inside, something felt off. Hollow. Every day became a routine she couldn't escape. Wake up. Study. Attend class. Repeat. No excitement. No connection. Just motion without meaning. That was the tension tightening. The harder she tried to keep up, the more drained she felt. Nights grew longer, but not productive, just exhausting. She stared at pages without absorbing anything. Numbers blurred. Concepts faded. And still, she kept going. Because stopping felt worse. Then came the breaking point. One night, sitting alone with her books open, Ava realized something chilling. She didn't care anymore. Not about the grades. Not about the outcome. Not even about failing. That was the shock. Not panic. Not fear. Just emptiness. A silence louder than anything before. She closed her laptop slowly, staring at her reflection on the dark screen, and for the first time, she didn't recognize herself. That was the release, but not relief. More like surrender. The twist? No one saw it. Her performance hadn't collapsed. She was still fine. Still functioning. Still meeting expectations. But inside, she had already detached. And once the detachment sets in, it spreads. Because now, it wasn't just about doing something she didn't love. It was about becoming someone she didn't even know anymore. And once that detachment took hold, the first real failure wasn't far behind. At first, it came quietly. A missed detail. A concept she thought she understood, but didn't. Ava told herself it was nothing. Just one mistake. Just one test. She had recovered before. She could do it again. That was the build. A fragile sense of control holding everything together. But the tension tightened fast. The exam day arrived, and something felt off. Her mind was slower. Her focus scattered. Questions she had seen before suddenly looked unfamiliar. And then it happened the moment she knew. She wasn't going to pass. Not this time. Her chest tightened. Her hands went cold, but she kept writing anyway. Because stopping would make it real. And when the results came back, it was worse than she expected. She didn't just fail, she fell far below the line. That was the shock. Not close. Not fixable. Just failure. Clear. Undeniable. Final. For a second, everything went silent again. No panic. No tears. Just that same emptiness, now heavier. That was the release, but it didn't free her. It trapped her deeper. Because this time, it wasn't just a feeling. It was proof. The twist? Part of her wasn't even surprised. And that was the most dangerous part. Because the moment failure stops shocking you, it starts defining you. And as Ava stared at her score, one thought echoed louder than anything else. Maybe she was right all along. And as that thought settled in, maybe she was right, Ava made the mistake of picking up her phone. She didn't have to call. She knew how it would go. But something in her still hoped. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe failure would soften her mother, just a little. That was the build. A fragile hope, barely alive. The phone rang once. Twice. Then her mother answered. Calm. Controlled. Hello. Ava hesitated. For a second, she almost hung up. But she didn't. She told her. About the exam. About the result. Silence followed. Not long but heavy. That was the tension tightening. Ava waited for something concern, comfort, anything human. But instead, her mother exhaled slowly and said, I expected this. The words landed colder than anything before. No anger. No surprise. Just confirmation. Ava's grip tightened on the phone. Her chest sank. She tried to explain, to say she had tried, that it was harder than she thought. But her mother cut her off. Trying isn't enough. That was the shock. Sharp. Final. No room for discussion. And then it got worse. This is what happens when you're not focused. When you're not disciplined. Each sentence hit like a verdict already decided. Ava stopped speaking. Completely. That was the release, but not relief. More like collapse. Because in that moment, she wasn't just hearing criticism. She was hearing judgment. Permanent. The twist? Her mother wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. The calm made it undeniable. And as the call ended, Ava didn't cry. She just stared at the silent screen, one realization settling deeper than anything else. She wasn't just failing a class. She was becoming exactly who her mother said she was. And after the call ended, something about the silence felt different this time. Not empty. Not numb. But sharp. That was the build. Ava sat there, staring at the dark screen, her mother's words still echoing, but now, they didn't just hurt, they questioned everything. The tension rose slowly, then all at once. Because for the first time, Ava wasn't asking, why am I not enough? She was asking something far more dangerous. Who decided that? The thought hit harder than any insult. That was the shock. It didn't come from anger, it came from clarity. A sudden, almost uncomfortable awareness spreading through her chest. Ava looked around her room again, but now it felt different. The books. The notes. The life she had been living. None of it felt chosen. It felt assigned. That realization tightened the pressure even more. Because if she never chose this, then what else wasn't hers? Her breathing changed. Faster. Sharper. And then another shift. A memory surfaced. The sketches. The nights she felt alive. The part of her she buried. That was the release, but not relief. More like awakening. Because suddenly, the question wasn't about failure anymore. It was about truth. And the truth was impossible to ignore. Ava didn't fail because she couldn't succeed. She failed because she wasn't being herself. The twist landed deep. Clean. Final. And this time, it didn't fade. It stayed. Growing louder. Stronger. What if I stopped living for approval? That thought didn't scare her, it pulled her forward. And in that moment, sitting alone in a silent room, Ava didn't feel lost anymore. She felt something far more powerful, She felt awake. And once that awakening settled in, Ava couldn't go back to pretending. That was the build. The next morning felt different. Same room. Same books. Same schedule waiting for her. But something inside had shifted permanently. She sat there, staring at her notes, but the words no longer held power. They felt distant. Irrelevant. That was the tension rising. Because now she knew the truth, and still staying would mean choosing to ignore it. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with urgency. If I stay, I lose myself. The thought came fast. Clear. Unavoidable. That was the shock. Ava stood up abruptly. Not slowly. Not uncertainly. Decisively. She looked around one last time, the desk, the pages, the version of her that had tried so hard to fit in, and something inside her let go. That was the release. Not loud. Not dramatic. But final. She packed her bag, closed her laptop, walked out of the room. Each step felt unreal, but right. Then came the twist. No one stopped her. No alarms. No confrontation. The world didn't react at all. And somehow, that made it even more real. Because this wasn't rebellion. It was choice. Pure and simple. Ava stepped outside, the air hitting differently now, sharper, clearer. And for the first time, she understood something deeply unsettling and freeing at the same time. No one was going to save her. But no one was stopping her either. And that meant everything from this point on was hers to create. And once Ava stepped into that freedom, reality followed fast. It didn't feel like a movie. No instant success. No sudden clarity. Just uncertainty. That was the build. A tiny apartment. Bare walls. A mattress on the floor. Silence that felt different this time, not controlled, but empty. She told herself this was what she wanted. Her choice. Her life. But the tension crept in quickly. Bills didn't wait. Savings ran low. Days stretched long without direction. And for the first time, doubt came back, louder than before. What if she was right? The thought hit harder now, because there was no one else to blame. No system. No expectations. Just her. That was the pressure rising. Then came the shift. Small. Almost invisible. Ava opened her laptop and started creating again. Designs. Sketches. Ideas she had buried for years. No permission. No approval. Just instinct. That was the release. It didn't fix everything, but it felt real. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't pretending. But the twist? No one noticed. No applause. No validation. Just quiet effort in a world that didn't care yet. And still, she kept going. Because this time, she wasn't chasing approval. She was chasing herself. And that changes everything. Comment, new start, if you've ever walked away to rebuild your life. And as Ava leaned into that new beginning, reality didn't wait to test her. That was the build. At first, it felt manageable. She woke up early, opened her laptop, and worked, design after design, refining her portfolio, sending out emails with quiet hope. It felt like progress. Like movement. Like maybe something would shift soon. But days passed. Then more days. And nothing came back. That was the tension rising. No replies. No interest. Just silence stretching longer each time she checked her inbox. She refreshed. Again. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Each empty screen hit harder than the last. Maybe they didn't even look. The thought crept in. Then grew louder. Her savings began to drop, slowly at first, then faster. Numbers that once felt safe now looked fragile. Rent was coming. Bills were waiting. And for the first time, the pressure wasn't emotional, it was real. Immediate. Unavoidable. That was the escalation tightening. Ava started adjusting. cutting costs, skipping meals, telling herself it was temporary, that something would come. It had to. That was the release, but it wasn't relief. It was survival mode. Then came the shock. One morning, she opened her bank account and froze. The numbers staring back at her didn't feel real. Not low, not tight, almost gone. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a deadline. And suddenly, the silence in her apartment felt heavier than ever. No backup. No support. No safety net. Just her. And the consequences of every choice she made. The twist? For a split second, she thought about going back. Back to school. Back to safety. Back to everything she had just walked away from. The thought hit fast. Tempting. Easy. But just as quickly, something else rose to meet it. Stronger. Sharper. If I go back now, I lose everything I just fought to become. And that realization changed the weight of the moment. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about identity. And Ava knew, whatever happened next, she wasn't turning back. And as that decision held, the nights became unbearable. That was the build. Daytime still gave her something to hold on to, tasks, distractions, movement. But when night fell, everything caught up. Ava lay in the dark, eyes open, the ceiling above her feeling closer than before. The silence wasn't quiet anymore, it was loud. Every thought echoed. Every doubt sharpened. That was the tension tightening. What if this doesn't work? What if I've already failed? The questions didn't come one at a time, they flooded in. She turned, sat up, walked across the small room, then back again. No escape. No pause. Just her and her mind. Then came the breaking point. One night, exhausted, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, Ava covered her face and whispered, "I can't do this." That was the shock. Raw. Unfiltered. The words felt heavy the moment they left her lips. And for a second, everything stopped. That was the release, but it didn't bring peace. It felt like collapse. Like the fight had finally drained out of her. But then, something shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. A breath she didn't realize she was holding escaped. And underneath the exhaustion, another thought surfaced, quieter, but stronger. Then what's the other option? That was the twist. Because going back didn't feel like relief anymore. It felt like erasing everything she had just fought to claim. The fear didn't disappear, but it changed. It no longer pushed her backward. It held her in place. And in that fragile moment, sitting alone in the dark, Ava didn't feel powerful, but she felt something just as important. She hadn't quit yet. And just when Ava thought she had reached her lowest point, her mother's voice found her again. That was the build. The phone lit up in the darkness, cutting through the fragile silence she had barely managed to hold together. Ava stared at the screen. She didn't want to answer. She already knew what was coming. But something in her habit, maybe hope, made her pick it up. The tension tightened instantly. No greeting. No warmth. Just a pause, and then, "So, how long is this phase going to last?" The words landed cold. Calculated. Ava's chest tightened, but she forced herself to respond, trying to explain again that she was working, that she was trying. But her mother didn't let her finish. Trying, she repeated, almost amused. That was the shock. Not anger. Worse. Disbelief. "You left everything for this?" Sitting alone with no job. Each sentence hit harder than the last, stacking pressure on top of pressure. Ava's grip on the phone tightened. Her voice faded. That was the release, but not relief. It was silence. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to defend. And then came the twist. Her mother's tone didn't rise. It stayed calm. Certain. "You're wasting your life." The sentence didn't echo, it settled. Heavy. Final. And in that moment, Ava realized something that cut deeper than all the words before. This wasn't concern. It wasn't even disappointment. It was judgment, already decided. And as those words echoed, "You're proving exactly who you are," something inside Ava didn't break this time. It hardened. That was the build. She sat there, phone still in her hand, but the weight felt different now. Not crushing. Clarifying. The tension shifted. For so long, she had been trying to prove her mother wrong. Trying to earn something that was never freely given. But now, a new realization surfaced, sharp, undeniable. There is nothing left to prove. That thought hit like a shock. Not loud. Not explosive. But final. Ava stood up slowly, her breathing steadying for the first time in days. She looked around her small apartment again, but this time, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like truth. That was the release. Quiet, grounded, real. Then came the twist. Going back was no longer an option. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. Even if she failed here, at least it would be her failure. Her choice. Her life. And that changed everything. The fear didn't disappear, but it lost control. Because now, every step forward wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about refusing to abandon herself again. And once that decision is made, there's no turning back. And once Ava chose not to turn back, something unexpected finally shifted. Not loudly. Not instantly. But enough. That was the build. Days passed like before, quiet work, unanswered emails, the same routine, but this time, she didn't wait for validation. She just kept creating. Then one morning, something different appeared. A notification. Small. Ordinary. Easy to ignore. But she didn't. That was the tension. Ava clicked it slowly, her breath catching without knowing why. An email. From a company she didn't recognize. Her eyes scanned the first line, then stopped. "We came across your portfolio." Her heart skipped. She read faster. Then again. Slower. Making sure it was real. "And we're impressed." That was the shock. Sudden. Sharp. Unreal. For a second, Ava didn't move. Didn't breathe. Because this had never happened before. That was the release, but it wasn't relief yet. It was disbelief. Fragile. Then came the twist. They didn't ask about her degree. Didn't question her background. Just one thing: "Are you available to work with us?" Simple. Direct. No judgment. And in that moment, something shifted deeper than opportunity. It wasn't just an email. It was proof. Quiet, but undeniable. That maybe, just maybe, she had been looking in the wrong place for approval all along. And just as that email began to feel real, the next step arrived faster than Ava expected. That was the build. It wasn't an offer. Not yet. It was a test. A second message appeared. "We'd like you to complete a short project." Simple words, but they carried everything. Ava stared at the screen, her heartbeat quickening. This wasn't hope anymore. This was pressure, real and immediate. The tension tightened as she opened the brief, reading every line slowly. Requirements. Deadline. Expectations. Clear, but overwhelming. This is it, she thought. This decides everything. The weight settled deep in her chest, heavier with every second she kept staring. She didn't hesitate. She started immediately. Hours passed. Then nights. Sketches turned into drafts. Drafts into revisions. Again. And again. Nothing felt right. That was the pressure rising. Every idea she created, she questioned. Every version, she doubted. What if it's still not enough? The thought grew louder. Sharper. It echoed with every click, every erased line. Then came the breaking point. One late night, exhausted, staring at her screen, Ava hovered over the close button. One click, and it would all end. No judgment. No risk. No more pressure. That was the shock. So close. So easy. Her finger didn't move. Instead, she froze. Breathed. And something shifted. That was the release. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time, stopped trying to be good enough. She let go of expectation. Let go of fear. And when she returned to the screen, she didn't edit, she created. Honestly. Freely. The work changed. It flowed. It felt real. And then came the twist. When she finally finished, it no longer felt like a test. It felt like a statement. Not about whether she could succeed, but about who she had become. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the result. And after she sent her work, the waiting returned, but this time, it felt different. That was the build. Ava didn't panic. She didn't obsessively refresh her inbox like before. Instead, she sat with it. Quiet. Still. But beneath that calm, something else was happening. The tension stretched with every passing hour. Every notification sound made her heart jump. Every silence felt heavier than it should. Did they see it? Did it matter? The questions circled, louder each time. Then it happened. A new email. Simple. Unremarkable. But everything inside her paused. That was the shock building. Ava clicked slowly, almost afraid to read too fast. Her eyes moved across the first line, then stopped. We'd like to offer you a position. The words didn't register at first. She blinked. Read it again. Slower this time. The sentence didn't change. It was real. That was the release. Not explosive. Not loud. Just a deep, steady wave moving through her. Her shoulders dropped. Her breath finally escaped. Months of pressure, doubt, silence, all of it shifting in a single moment. But then came the twist. It didn't feel like luck. It didn't feel like someone had given her a chance. It felt like something she had built piece by piece, night after night, when no one was watching. And that changed everything. Because this wasn't just a job. It was proof. Quiet, undeniable proof that she had never been the failure she was told she was. And once Ava stepped into that role, she didn't just show up, she proved herself again and again. That was the build. The first days were intense. New systems. New expectations. Real consequences. But this time, she wasn't lost. She wasn't pretending. She worked with clarity, moving fast, thinking deeper, delivering more than asked. At first, small tasks. Minor projects. Quick turnarounds. She handled them all clean, sharp, reliable. The tension began to rise as trust followed. More responsibility. Tighter deadlines. Higher expectations. Every task mattered now. Every mistake had weight. Can I keep this up? The question surfaced, but didn't stop her. Then came the shift. A bigger project landed on her desk. Complex. High stakes. Others hesitated. Ava didn't. She stepped in. Took control. That was the escalation. Long nights returned, but this time, they weren't filled with doubt. They were filled with focus. Iteration after iteration, pushing further each time. The pressure peaked. And then, the result came back. The project didn't just pass. It stood out. That was the shock. Clients praised it. Leadership noticed. Conversations changed. Her name started coming up in rooms she wasn't even in. That was the release. Recognition. Trust. Momentum building fast. But then came the twist. It didn't stop there. People started relying on her. Not just for execution, but for direction. Questions shifted. What do you think? How should we approach this? Suddenly, she wasn't just part of the team, she was a pillar. The one others leaned on. The one who carried weight without asking for it. And in that quiet transformation, without announcements or titles at first, Ava became something no one had ever expected her to be: indispensable. And as Ava became indispensable to everyone else, something even more important began to return to her. That was the build. Not recognition. Not success. Herself. At first, it was subtle. Almost easy to miss. The way her hands moved more freely across the screen. The way ideas came without hesitation. No second guessing. No inner voice cutting her down before she even began. That voice was quieter now. But not gone. The tension still lingered. In small moments. A pause after feedback. A slight delay in a response. A comment that wasn't entirely clear. And suddenly, it would whisper again, "What if it's not enough?" The old fear didn't disappear. It tested her. But this time, she didn't shrink. That was the shift. She leaned in. Adjusted. Improved. Moved forward. Again. And again. Each time, the voice lost a little more power. That was the release. Confidence didn't arrive loudly, it built quietly, layer by layer, decision by decision. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, alone, reviewing her own work, Ava paused. Not because something was wrong, but because everything felt right. Completely right. That was the shock. She wasn't comparing anymore. She wasn't chasing approval. She was creating from instinct. From clarity. From truth. And then came the twist. The very thing she had once been told to hide, her creativity, had become her greatest strength. The part of her that had been dismissed, silenced, pushed aside, was now the reason she stood out. The reason she mattered. But it didn't stop there. That realization hit deeper. Stronger. Because Ava understood something she had never seen before. She hadn't just improved. She hadn't just succeeded. She had returned. Returned to the version of herself she once buried. And this time, she wasn't letting anyone take it away again. And as Ava fully returned to herself, the next shift didn't come from effort alone, it came from recognition at a level she had never imagined. That was the build. She was no longer just contributing ideas. She was shaping direction. Influencing strategy. Decisions started to move through her. People didn't just ask what she could create, they asked what should be created. That was new. That was power. But with it came tension. Bigger stakes. Bigger risks. Every choice carried weight now. What if I make the wrong call? The thought surfaced, but it didn't stop her. Because this time, she had something stronger than doubt. She had proof. Then came the moment. A meeting. Quiet. Unexpected. The founders sat across from her, their expressions serious, but certain. Ava felt it instantly. Something was different. "You've changed how we build," one of them said. The words landed slow. Heavy. Real. That was the shock. Not praise. Not feedback. Recognition. At a different level. Ava didn't respond. She couldn't. She just listened. Then came the offer. Not a promotion. Not a title. Something bigger. "We want you to be part of this, fully." A pause. Then the words that changed everything, co-founder. That was the release. But not the kind that feels light. The kind that shifts everything beneath your feet. Ownership. Responsibility. Vision. It all became real in a single second. And then came the twist. This wasn't about being chosen. It was about becoming undeniable. Ava didn't hesitate. Not this time. Because she wasn't stepping into something new, she had already grown into it. Every failure, every night, every moment of doubt had built her for this exact point. And in that moment, without needing approval, without needing permission, Ava became someone her past would never recognize. She became the one who builds. And as Ava stepped fully into that role, the day arrived that would bring everything into focus. That was the build. The grand opening. Months' snow, years of effort, risk, and quiet resilience condensed into a single moment. The building stood tall, reflecting the sky like it had always belonged there. Inside, everything was flawless. Lights calibrated. Designs perfected. People gathering. Conversations rising. It looked like success. It sounded like success. But inside Ava, something else was building. The tension didn't come from fear. It came from weight. Because this wasn't just an event. It was proof. Every step she took through the space felt heavier, more real. Every corner carried a memory, late nights, doubts, choices no one saw. Then came the shift. Guests arrived faster. Partners, clients, investors. Faces she didn't recognize, but they recognized the work. They believed in what she had built. That was the release. Energy filled the room. Laughter. Voices. Movement. Ava smiled, nodded, spoke, but her mind was somewhere deeper. Something wasn't complete yet. Something still waiting. And then, it happened. Outside, a small crowd began to gather. Phones lifted. Conversations softened. A subtle shift in attention. Ava felt it before she saw it. That was the shock building. She stepped closer, her heartbeat slowing instead of racing. And then she looked up. Her name. Not hidden. Not small. Not temporary. Ava Carter. Bold. Permanent. Built into the structure itself. Time stopped. That was the release, but it didn't explode. It settled. Deep. Quiet. Final. And then came the twist. This wasn't just success. It wasn't just recognition. It was everything she had once been told she could never become, now impossible to ignore. And just as that moment settled into something undeniable, another presence entered the space. That was the build. A car door closed softly in the distance. Footsteps followed, slow, measured, familiar. Ava didn't need to turn right away. Something in her already knew. The tension rose instantly, quiet but overwhelming. Years of memories, words, silence, all stepping closer with each sound. Then she turned. Her mother stood there. Still. Composed. Watching. No smile. No warmth. Just a gaze, sharp, searching, trying to understand what she was seeing. That was the pressure tightening. Ava felt it in her chest, not as fear, but as anticipation. This wasn't the same girl anymore. This wasn't the same moment. Then her mother moved. One step. Then another. Closer now. Her eyes slowly lifted, following the height of the building. That was the release beginning, but not complete. Because something in her expression started to change. Subtle. Almost unnoticeable. A crack. And then it hit. Her mother stopped walking. Completely still. That was the shock. Not loud. Not spoken. But undeniable. Her eyes locked onto the name, Ava Carter, etched across the building. The reality settled in, heavy and irreversible. Everything she believed. Everything she said. All colliding in one silent moment. And then came the twist. She didn't speak. Because for the first time, she didn't have control over the narrative anymore. She could only see it. And as that silence stretched between them, Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. That was the build. Because this moment wasn't about explanation. It was about witnessing. Slowly, almost instinctively, she followed her mother's gaze upward again. Past the glass. Past the reflections. Higher. And higher. The tension tightened with every inch her mother's eyes climbed, as if the truth itself was pulling her upward. Then, it stopped. Her mother's gaze locked. That was the moment. No movement. No sound. Just stillness. Thick, heavy, undeniable. And there it was. Ava Carter. Bold. Metallic. Permanent. Not a sign. Not a label, but part of the building itself. That was the shock. Not explosive, but absolute. The kind that doesn't hit fast, it settles deep. Her mother didn't blink, didn't move, because this wasn't something she could question. This wasn't something she could correct. It was real. That was the release, but not relief. It was confrontation. Silent. Unavoidable. Every word she had ever said, every doubt she had ever placed, now standing in direct opposition to what she was seeing. Ava didn't look away. She watched her mother see it. Really see it. Then came the shift. A flicker in her mother's expression. Small. Subtle. But there. Confusion. Disbelief. Something cracking beneath certainty. That was the escalation. Because for the first time, her mother wasn't reacting. She was processing. Recalculating everything she thought she knew. And then it hit deeper. Her mother's posture changed. Just slightly. Shoulders no longer rigid. Chin no longer raised. The control, slipping. That was the second shock. Because this wasn't just about success. It was about power. And, for the first time, Ava wasn't the one beneath it. And then came the final twist. Ava still said nothing. No, I told you so. No explanation. No defense. Because this moment didn't belong to words. It belonged to truth. And for the first time in her life, her mother wasn't looking at who she believed Ava was. She was looking at who Ava had become. And there was nothing left to argue. And as that undeniable truth stood between them, the silence finally broke. That was the build. Not loudly. Not suddenly. Just a small shift, her mother's breath catching, her posture changing ever so slightly. Ava didn't move. She waited. The tension stretched tighter than ever. Because this moment mattered more than anything that came before. Years of words had led here. Years of doubt, judgment, distance. And now there was nowhere left to hide. Her mother lowered her gaze slowly, then looked at Ava again. Really looked. Not past her. Not through her. At her. That was the first crack. Then came the words. Quiet. Almost fragile. I didn't think you could do this. That was the shock. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. No certainty. No control. Just truth. Ava felt it land, but differently this time. Not as a wound. As a release. Years of pressure loosening in a single breath. But it didn't end there. Her mother hesitated, as if the next words were harder to say. And then another shift. I was wrong. The moment froze. Completely. That was the escalation. The strongest one yet. Because this wasn't criticism. This wasn't expectation. This was admission. Real. Unavoidable. And then came the twist. Ava didn't feel victory. No satisfaction. No need to respond. Because this wasn't about being right anymore. It was about being seen. And for the first time in her life, she was. And as those words hung in the air, I was wrong, everything seemed to pause around Ava. That was the build. Not because she didn't understand them, but because she had imagined this moment so many times, and it never felt like this. No triumph. No surge of emotion. Just stillness. The tension rose in a different way now. Because for years, she thought this was what she needed. An apology. An admission. Something to balance all the weight she had carried. But standing there, looking at her mother, Ava realized something unexpected. It didn't change the past. It didn't erase the nights, the doubt, the silence. And yet, it didn't hurt anymore either. That was the shift. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't in years. That was the release. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just quiet acceptance. Ava met her mother's eyes, steady, calm, not the girl who used to shrink under that gaze, but someone entirely different. someone whole. Then came the moment. She smiled, soft, controlled, but real. That was the shock. Because it wasn't forced. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't even emotional in the way her mother might have expected. It was free. I know, Ava said gently. Simple. Direct. No edge. No resentment. That was the escalation. Because those two words carried everything, every struggle, every choice, every step she took alone. But then came the twist. Ava didn't need more. She didn't ask for validation. She didn't revisit the past. Because she had already moved beyond it. And in that moment, something even deeper became clear. She hadn't succeeded to prove her mother wrong. She had succeeded because she finally chose herself. And now, standing there, face to face with the person who once defined her limits, Ava felt something she had never felt before. Not pride, not relief, but peace. And as that quiet sense of peace settled within her, Ava finally understood something she had been chasing for years without realizing it. That was the build. Success had never looked like this in her mind. She thought it would feel loud, victorious, like proving something to the world. But standing there, with everything she had built behind her and nothing left to defend, it felt different. The tension shifted inward. Because now the question wasn't, did I make it? It was, what does this actually mean? For a moment, she looked around. The building, the people, the name that once felt impossible. All of it real. All of it hers. That was the release, but not in the way she expected. There was no rush. No overwhelming pride. Just clarity. Deep, steady clarity. And then it hit her. The shock. Stronger than any moment before. Success wasn't about reaching a place where no one could doubt her. It was about reaching a place where their doubt no longer mattered. That realization changed everything. Because for so long, she believed success would rewrite her past. Erase the words. Silence the memories. But it didn't. The twist? It didn't need to. The past stayed exactly where it was, but it no longer had power. And that was freedom. Real freedom. Ava took a slow breath, feeling it fully for the first time. She hadn't built all of this to be seen. She hadn't fought this hard to be right. She had done it to become someone who could stand in her own truth without needing permission. And in that moment, the meaning of success became undeniable. It wasn't the building. It wasn't the title. It wasn't even the recognition. It was the ability to look at herself and know she was enough. And as that truth settled into something unshakable, Ava realized her story was never just about her. That was the build. Because out there, somewhere, someone was still standing in that same moment she once lived through, being told they weren't enough, being compared, being dismissed. The tension rose with that thought. Because those words don't just disappear. They stay. They echo. They shape how you see yourself until you believe them. And that's where everything begins to break. But here's the shift. The release. Quiet but powerful. What people say about you is not who you are. It's who they believe you are. And those are not the same thing. That realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop chasing their version of you, you finally start becoming your own. Then comes the shock. The strongest one of all. You don't need permission to change your life. Not from your parents. Not from your past. Not from anyone. The only thing you need is the courage to choose yourself when it's hardest. When it's unclear. When it feels like you might lose everything. And here's the twist. That's exactly where your real life begins. Not when everything is safe, but when you decide to stop living for approval. Because the truth is simple, pain doesn't define you. Doubt doesn't define you. Even failure doesn't define you. What defines you is what you choose to do next. And if you've made it this far, then something in this story stayed with you. That was the build. Maybe it was the doubt. The silence. The moment someone made you feel like you weren't enough. The tension rises because deep down, you remember exactly how that felt. And maybe, just maybe, you're still carrying it. Still hearing those words in your head when things get hard. When you hesitate. When you almost give up. But here's the shift. The release. You're still here. You didn't stop. You didn't disappear. And that means something. More than you think. Because not everyone keeps going after being broken like that. So now ask yourself, honestly, what have you been holding back? What have you been afraid to choose because someone once told you couldn't? That's the real question. And it's not easy. That's the tension again. Then comes the shock. You don't need to wait anymore. Not for approval. Not for the right time. Not for someone to finally believe in you. That moment? It's already passed. And here's the twist. The only thing standing between who you are and who you could become is one decision. So don't scroll past this. Don't ignore it. Say it. Own it. Comment, I choose me.